it's an amazing responsibility. You know, I love what I do. You know, it's amazing to come and say that I go to work and I work with some of the oldest vineyard material in the world. It's awesome. So then just, you know, be proud of what you do and leave it better, in better condition than what you found it.
I met Tom for one day and I think I offered him a job because I noticed that he's a young guy from the Barossa who'd studied winemaking, which is what I was looking for.
Nigel Blieschke and Tom Bartholomaeus are the viticulturists behind Torbreck's towering presence in the Australian wine industry, responsible for making the most of some of the oldest grapevines in the world. The responsibility of custodianship over such vineyards isn't lost on Nigel, whose knowledge and respect for nature was passed down to him from his grandfather, growing up in the Flinders Ranges. Tom is a sixth-generation Barossa grower known for his soft pruning methods that he's recently brought back from Italy. Having developed their craft over decades, starting in the booming 90s, both Nigel and Tom worked from the ground up to ensure things are looked after for the future ahead, while producing fruit in the here and now that's better than ever. Here's Tom and Nigel.
Welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Vines, the wellbeing podcast for growers, proudly brought to you by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia and sponsored by PIRSA. Hosted by award-winning mental health podcaster Callum McPherson and wine columnist for The Australian, Nick Ryan.
Nigel, when you were growing up in the Flinders Ranges, I believe your grandfather had a keen interest in nature and that rubbed off on you. Can you tell us about that?
Oh yeah, well I grew up on a sheep and cattle farm, so that's quite a high rainfall hilly area. So, you know, farming was, you know, we had lots of our own vegetable gardens and all that sort of stuff, and a pretty nice environment. So my grandparents used to grow all their own vegetables and had their own cattle and sheep and dairy cows. So I spent a lot of time with them, you know, around the gardens, and, you know, really enjoyed that side of things. It was a good learning experience, but yeah, it certainly had a big impact on me. They used to have some grapevines. I used to remember looking at all those, the way they were pruned, and ended up sort of falling into that industry in the long run. So.
And your grandpa knew the names of all the birds and
yeah. He was unreal. He taught us all about which trees were which and what was you know, what birds were coming through, and so yeah, that was a big part of my early life, running around on Mount Remarkable up in the hills in the Flinders. It's we were surrounded by national parks, so yeah.
And what was unique about growing up in that isolated area?
I guess you made your own luck, you made your own fun. We just had motorbikes and stuff, and we would just drive off for a whole day. Mum wouldn't let us in the house; we'd get kicked out. So, you know, you just had a lot of time to run around. So yeah, I guess that was where we grew up. We were 5 k's out of town, so it wasn't like we could duck in and see our friends, you know, easily. So that was part of it, what we did.
How old were you when you first got on the motorbike?
I think I was about 6.
Yeah.
So pretty early on.
How did you view farming back then?
I wasn't a great fan of sheep farming. Working for my old man was always hard, always interesting. But no, I mean, we just grew up with it. So yeah, it was a lot of, you know, just working for Dad on the weekends. So like I said, my older brother was more a farmer than I was. So I was sort of probably more interested in that nature side of things. And hence when I went to uni, I I really wasn't going to be a sheep and cattle farmer.
More a tree hugger.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I am. Still am today.
And Tom, you come from a family of growers. Can you tell us a bit about your family history?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually fortunate enough to live in the original Zirk homestead in the Barossa Valley. So the property that I now own was built by my great-great-great-grandfather, and also comprises the Hoffnung-style settlement in the Barossa Valley. So we've been out on that site since the Barossa was settled, which is a super unique thing to be able to say. And we've also got some fantastic old vine material, or ancestor material now, planted back as far as 1887. So, you know, growing up on a place like that, I guess the message that was passed down through our family was that we're custodians of land, and, you know, we're part of something that, you know, is special, and to look after it, to nurture it, and have your bit on taking it through to the future in your generation. So.
Did you really understand that from a young age and have a drive to want to carry that on?
Very much so. I guess the historical value of the property was, I guess, shown to me at a very young age. It was part of a business that my grandparents were running through a cellar door that they had on the property, then tours that they ran So it was very much about, this is why we're here, and this is what our part is to the Barossa Valley. So, understand that, you're part of history as well as what you may think is future. But yeah.
And what were your childhood memories full of from that time?
Well, there's, as well as the vineyard and some, I guess, stock and grazing land, there's 2 large lagoons on the property. So for me, outside of messing around the vineyard or, helping Grandad, either, get out and, hunt down foxes and hares or whatever was a pest in the vineyard, or just to being out walking around the lagoons, or, getting out in a boat back in the days when we had rain. It's not so much of that anymore, but, growing up and being able to, sit out in a boat in the middle of a massive body of water in the middle of the Barossa was,
that's pretty unique.
Yeah, pretty special memory. So.
And did that cement wanting to build your life around the same?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I grew up on that side of the family, they were growers. I had a cellar door, and then on my father's side of the family, it was wine export and business. So I grew up very much around vineyard and winemaking, and I guess I was tempted by music at one point, but I very much saw a future in viticulture and winemaking to a point as well.
Play any instruments?
Yeah, play saxophone. So
nice.
Spent a bunch of years messing around in Adelaide, playing around some pretty fun venues and stuff like that. So it's good fun.
You still play?
Locally, not as much as I probably should be, but yeah, still dabble, I guess.
Very cool. The sax is great. And what about you, Nigel? How did you get into what you've built your career around?
Well, I guess when I went to uni, I studied environmental science at Roseworthy College, and actually studied with a guy called Ian Hongell and many years ago. So I guess going to an agricultural college, I probably end up spending more time with ag students and winemakers and wine marketers at the college rather than natural resource management students. And sort of probably had
Bonkies rather than nat rats.
So the nat rats were they were great people, but they were definitely tree huggers back in the day. And look, the reality of that, when we left uni, there was no jobs in environmental. Land care wasn't a thing. It was a very different time. But, having met a lot of winemakers and wine marketers, guys like Matt Harrop, was one of my best mates, and, you'd ask him, what's a good wine? You're a winemaker, and he'd sort of look at you and go, drinking a wine, he goes, do you like that? And go, yeah, well, that's a good wine. And so I really, I think that cohort of people had a huge influence on me, Fiona Donald and, PJ Charteris and those guys. So they were great. It was a fantastic university to learn at. But so when I left university, some of the NatRat girls went on and did some postgraduate study. So there was a bit of an inkling there. And when I left Roseworthy, I ended up working just pruning. Worked at Jim Barry Wines, pruned the Armagh vineyard, 1994, and I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a really, it was a good thing. You sit back. It's a bit like when you're on a farm. We would do a lot of fencing, and you could look back at the end of the day and I've done that. But pruning was a bit of an art for me. Is a bit of an art. So I guess once I left Roseworthy, I was good mates with a few guys at Clare, and ended up going up to Clare, playing a bit of football up there, and ended up working in vineyards, doing a few vintages. Did a vintage at Wakery in '93, and then I went to the Hunter Valley in '94, and worked down at Padthaway for a while, just in a merchandise store. So I did a lot of travelling around, and ended up deciding that viticulture was where I wanted to be, and went back and did a postgraduate certificate in '96.
Talk about that. Just touch on the pruning thing again. I mean, there's pruning and there's pruning.
Yeah.
And when there is an art to doing it right and doing it for quality. I just want to maybe expand on that a bit.
Yeah, well, when I was taught to prune, there was a guy, David Smith, who was the vineyard manager at Jim Barry's at the time, and I remember the first vineyard they put me into was the McRae Wood Vineyard, and it was like massive big vines. They were huge. But David sat down and said, well, look, we prune, to obviously set the crop, but also for disease control and all these sort of things. So it was really, his lesson was more about, we want airflow, we want light into the vine. So I think I was taught by someone who actually really understood what pruning is about. It's more than just setting the crop. It's about setting up the whole way the vine's grown. So And, you know, as I got into my career, I sort of moved into technical viticulture and, you know, learning about it. Started working the Riverland. And I guess that, you know, I learned how to grow vines, you know, watering, fertilizer, disease. And my biggest problem with the Riverland was there wasn't any pruning, you know, or very little. So, you know, then I started working in grower liaison, and you started to look at the wines that we were making. And, you know, pruning was probably the thing that really defined the best wines that we were making in the winery. So again, all those little lessons you learn along the way about that was it's going to be one of the key drivers. And so for me, it was always something that was fundamental to what I did, was pruning.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tom, soft pruning's big for you. Can you explain where that's come from and how that impacts what you do?
Sure. Well, I guess for me, I mean, my quest for quality in pruning started when I first got into it. I guess my learnings have been expansive along the way, but I mean, when I first started, before I got involved in soft pruning, my introduction to the first vineyard manager I ever worked for, I was working for a contractor, and a gentleman came out to the vineyard one day, and I started talking about how this company wasn't pruning for quality, and I think they could be doing a better job, and all of these other things. And I was then told that was the vineyard manager. Yeah. Whoops. And I said, well, I'm going to stick by it. And
what do you think of that?
He said, well, I guess I can't disagree with what you're saying at the time. And they ended up making some changes. And then he said, just next time, watch out who you're talking to. I said, well, you listened. So
there you go.
But
that set the tone.
Yeah, so that was good. But since then, I started working at Torbreck, and they'd just started touching on the use of soft pruning methods through an Italian consultancy company that they were dealing with and still work with at that time. And so the more we worked with that company, the more I kind of started thinking, well, hang on a second, like, we obviously prune for quality, but there's so many more components of this that I could potentially use to help us through sustainability, longevity of vineyards, and helping with disease pressure and disease resistance, particularly trunk diseases. I mean, everyone here knows that we've got huge problems with Utipa. And a big thing for me then was that, you know, I want to learn a different way to deal with it, because we're kind of reacting to a problem now. We're not kind of being proactive and going, well, how can we stop it in the first place? So,
can you explain the difference in methods and how that impacts things?
how many days have we got for this?
Brief summary.
But to give you an idea, I guess just to start that, the problems that we're seeing in disease had come from pruning.
Yeah.
So they were man-made.
Yeah, so a big thing straight up is smaller cuts. So minimising those super large cuts that you're making, and then getting away from the trunk, I guess, when you're making those cuts. So, you know, leaving a vine with an ability to die back naturally, as opposed to us forcing the vine to die back in a way that it ultimately doesn't want to. But that's a very, very quick.
That was a good synopsis.
That's what you put on the t-shirt.
Yeah.
Just another
succinct. And certainly the methods that we were taught is very much about looking at the vine and how is it growing, and understanding how it actually grows, which is the sap flow, west flows underneath the plant, and working with the sap flow rather than against it. So you're always trying to like have the healthiest sap flow. And again, that's a really important part of it. But also looking at the vine and being able to sum it up and say, well, you know, if you left 20 buds and only 10 have shot, you probably put too much on that vine.
Yeah.
And again, if you look at where the healthiest shoots are, is where they get the most sap flow. So it's very much about understanding those things.
What's your philosophy with pruning and sustainability and the way you go about it?
When I started at Claire, it was like the first thing was like, when in doubt, cut it out.
Yeah.
And I probably still have that philosophy in some ways, but I'm doing it a lot better than we used to. But again, I think, you know, you don't need a lot of buds to get, you know, good healthy fruit. So again, I probably prune a lot harder than most people would. And I guess when I started at Torbreck, we started with a resource that was a fantastic whole vine resource, but it probably hadn't had a lot of investment in it. And so I guess probably one of the first things I did was actually cut the bud numbers back and trying to grow good healthy canes. That's probably the one thing that where I started. And you know, realising we had a lot of trunk diseases, Utipa particularly, Botryosphaeria, you know, looking at how we're going to rework and how it's one thing to cut them off and start them again, but I didn't want to do that again. And it was just fortunate that the guys from Italy came out and just having to drop in. They'll visit. I think Henschke's were probably the first to have a look at the Simonite and Cirque method, and they just dropped in and had a chat, and I just went straight away. It's like that's what I need.
Yeah.
I need that. I need that method because again, I'd worked in vineyards for a lot of years, and again, I could see where we had uniform growth and good healthy growth. We're making better wine, and that's what really drives me. And the business that I work with is about wine quality. We don't have a second label. We can't lose it. So, trying to, for me, I want to go every one of our vineyards to produce wine that represents that vineyard. And then no one walks away from that.
Yeah. And you also work with a, pretty extensive network of growers as well. I mean, how do you get everyone on the same page?
I don't think you can, honestly.
But I do think that results speak for themselves. I mean, if we can... if we can show that we're setting a benchmark or we're setting a precedent in the vineyard, it's much easier to say to a person, here's what we're doing and here's how it's worked. And then they can go, okay, well, it's sitting right in front of me. Maybe we'll give it a go.
So again, we have we have an opportunity to actually do this properly. Being a company vineyards, we're allowed to grow quality. Without probably constraints that other people. So again, I think I spent a lot of years. I guess trying to talk with people about what we do and why you do it. But the easiest way was to show people. And I guess, that we live and die by the quality of our wines. And I think they're stacking up.
And that's always been part of the Torbreck culture too. We were talking about it, before we started recording. The old growers' days and things at Torbreck where you keep everything sort of separate and people can see where that fruit has ended up and a benchmark against.
Yeah, and that's such a positive thing. Again, you don't need to. No one needs to be telling what they need to do. It's like, well, here's how we're doing it, and these are the reasons why, and come and have a look. I'm happy to share any of this information because it's just, it's just pretty straightforward. It's pretty logical. I think that's what I like about it. It's not highfalutin. It's pretty straightforward.
You talk a lot. Well, we all talk a lot about the great old vine resource in the Barossa, and you guys get to work with a significant amount of great old vineyard. What are the special needs of some of these old vineyards? How do you work with some of the ancient vineyards as opposed to younger, more vigorous vineyards?
Oh, look, the old vineyards are they're not uniform. The vines are not uniform. And it's quite interesting. When I started at Torbreck, it was like, you can't touch the old vines. These are great. And it's like, I'm looking at them going, no. they're not great. And, they were growing all over the top of each other. So, some of these old vines, 1850 Shiraz, they've grown out and it's very interesting, if you look at the first 100 years, they've grown about that far. They were dry grown, organic vines. And they had no water, so they grew slowly and they were pruned accordingly. They couldn't put 8 canes. Like we had got some 1850 Shiraz and used to get 8 canes years ago, before Torbreck bought it. And, so when you come in and you could see they were pretty overgrown, but, when we came along and put a new trellis in it, we've grown them really quickly. And that's where a lot of the problems have started. It's where we've lifted them up and then started making return cuts to actually, you grow up and then it gets too long and you just chop it off and run another spur. So, again, I think it's that complexity and, we've then sort of grown them up and done that. So that's what makes them hard. They're not straight trunks. They're, and they've grown out wider. How do you bring them back into the middle, or how do you keep them in shape?
Well, that's a thing, that I've been more so focusing on in the last 12 months is simply just embrace the branching of an old vine like that. Let it keep growing. But, if you're concerned that it's getting too wide, don't necessarily think that you have to do a return cut like what's been done in the past. Just steer it in a different direction.
And those old vines don't have water shoots, so you haven't got a shoot that it's going to come up and you're just going to train it up again. I mean, the old bush vines are amazing. I mean, that's the best way to grow vines. They just grow naturally. You've got branching and you go with it. So again, I think that's just the complexity of that. And look, one of the issues we had when I started at Torbreck was that we had a different range of people pruning vines that some were okay and some weren't. And so, you know, again, we really, one of the first things that I addressed when I got there was just trying to get some consistent people to prune our vineyards. And we went back to, instead of having a big gang, we got a small gang.
Easier said than done, though. Is the the knowledge out there in the labour force?
Well, it's not, but you know, you've got people that have been doing it for a while, but there's nothing wrong with training someone. If you've got a particular way that you want to do something, starting from scratch with someone is, as far as I'm concerned, it's just as good. You can teach them what you want, and they'll get stuck into it. So I'd sooner say, you know, hold on to a smaller group of people for a more extended period of time, and you're going to get a far more consistent result.
Again, particularly with some of those, with the bush ones, where it's very much a matter of looking at each vine and making assessments vine by vine.
I think, you know, the thing that we've learned in the last few years is a set of rules. You know, you've got a set of rules. I mean, no vine, and again, the old vines are not perfect. Well, country vine. The young vineyards are so much easier to manage. But again, if you start with a set of rules in pruning, and I think Tom does a lot of work with a lot of school kids that come out and do a pruning course with us, and basically says, well, here's the set of rules I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to tell you how to break them. So having
it's amazing how much they love it when I say that.
That's right. So again, a lot of it's about training, and I think there's not the people there in the industry, but there's not the people being trained either. That's a big concern for us, because we've got a great group of Cambodian contractors that we've been working with now for 8 years. 5 of them pruned 150,000 vines last year. They did it quicker than the year before.
And it's amazing how much easier it gets when you have the same people coming back and pruning the same vines again. They know exactly what they're doing. We'll obviously be watching and adding our bits in for changes and whatnot, whatever we want to do in any given year. But you know, these guys have taken ownership of what they're doing. They're proud of it.
And they train, and then they pick for us as well. So we're very lucky in that respect. But we've also made that as a focus of what we're doing. What worries me is these guys are getting older, and who am I going to get to the next lot? I mean, I'd love to be able to train some younger people to prune, because, as I said, it sets up the vine. It sets up everything that we do in terms of wine quality.
And being custodians of some of the oldest vines going around, do you feel that responsibility?
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's responsibility. It's an amazing responsibility. You know, I love what I do. You know, it's amazing to come and say that I go to work and I work with some of the oldest vineyard material in the world. It's awesome. So then just, you know, be proud of what you do and leave it better, in better condition than what you found it. Just pass it on in an amazing state.
I mean, when I started a few years ago, and I met Tom for one day, and I think I offered him a job because I noticed that he's a young guy from the Barossa who'd studied winemaking, which is what I was looking for.
And you're impressed by his pruning, no doubt.
I was actually planting vineyard for him that day.
But that was definitely what I was looking for, someone who had some experience. And pruning, you need to think. Pruning's not a job that just turn the brain process off. You know, that's what I don't want. You know, that's the thing. But you know, again, we went out and we started looking at it. We started looking at how we're going to renovate these vineyards. And again, it was very fortuitous that we met the people we did when we did to actually start doing that process. But it was very important to go out, and we had to go and really look at these vines and work out what we're going to do with them.
And what do you guys get out of working together? You're obviously both really passionate and very knowledgeable about what you do, but being able to bounce off each other and try new things, you know, how good is that for what you're able to produce?
I think it's an incredibly valuable resource, being able to bounce off of someone to fire ideas at each other. Some days we get along like a house on fire doing that. Other days we say, what are you thinking? But I guess that's part and parcel of it. But I think it's fantastic.
Oh, look, I think, definitely having good people to work with is important. But again, it's good for me. I mean, like I said, that you asked about, you know, the pressure. I mean, there was a lot of pressure on me when I started in the vineyards. That, you know, the winemaker at the time, he basically said to me, I'm not allowed to touch these old vineyards because, they're making such great quality, but some parts of the vineyard were making good quality and others weren't. So, you know, I was, you know, I knew what I wanted to do, but to have someone, you know, Tom, another experienced pruner, and, you know, I'm going, well, I want to come in here with a chainsaw. There was a, you know, you don't stuff it up, you know. He said to me straight away, you know, don't. It's like, there was a heck of a lot of pressure. But again, having a, you know, problem shared is a problem halved, you know. So
that's it. Someone else to take the blame with you if it
well, it's true, but it was always going to come back on me eventually. But again, we did that, and we've done a pretty good job of it. But Tom and I did that work. We went through, and these particularly one old vineyard, and one block was making probably Woodcutter's, our lowest Shiraz, now makes $850 wine. So I think we've experienced, and because we were talking about it, going, what about this? There's an arm going out this way. These vines are big vines. And I was like, I'll get rid of it, and then go, what about this one? And go, yeah, get rid of it. Or, no, we'll keep that. So there was a lot of pressure, because again, it's a big resource. But when Ian came along, we started to get, when we were getting it right, he was looking at the wines and going, wow, this is pretty good. And he actually identified this block and went, I reckon that's good. Well, so it's really enheartening when you get to the other end and you're going, well,
so when you say get rid of it, it's like literally just rip it out.
It's more so playing with the architecture of a vine and going, I think there's a word that isn't mentioned enough in our industry, which is balance. People don't talk about vine balance enough, and we can come in and we can look at a vine and go, it's got arms going left, right, and centre, and the shoot growth, the cane growth on the top of the vine is inconsistent and it's weak. You've got thick areas here, and you've got thin and spindly canes there. We go, well, this vine is it's unbalanced. Like, what do we do to fix it?
So it's when I'm saying there'll be 4 or 5 arms with a cane, and it's like then you're having to wrap a cane over a cane, and I can. There's a lot of things that I really get me angry is like when I see people wrapping canes over canes and saying, well, that I need to get a crop. It's like, well, you got all bunches on bunches. I say to my pruners, does that look crowded? And they go, yeah. Well, that doesn't. Again, when you put all your shoots together, that's crowded, and that's not good for wine quality. So again, we were looking at that sort of stuff and saying, well, look, that arm really doesn't need to be here.
It's gone.
Yeah. So that was more. There was never a thought to pull these vineyards out. I mean, there's some blocks I think probably where you've got lots of gaps and all that sort of stuff, and that are full of disease that you can't really work. That's fine. But again, there was my view, and Tom's as well. Is like we're going to look after these things. We can rework it. There was a couple of Grenache blocks that I was ready to pull out because they were pretty knackered, and Tom convinced me on one that we could rework it. And we have got it. But again, it was some experience I'd learnt years ago with a vineyard that was trellised of Grenache, and the company cut it off in winter and had 5% strike, and they went back and did it during the growing season and had 95. So I'd sort of seen that before, where if we left something growing, we could you can rework them. So that was some good experiences there.
We're in pretty uncharted territory with some of these old vineyards. It's not like there's no other places around the world you can sort of look to see what are we doing here.
Yeah.
So it must really be take the time to understand what's happening. You are you're the vanguard of what's happening with these old vineyards,
and hopefully it's inspiring people to actually look after these old vineyards.
Yeah.
And speaking about looking after things more broadly, there's been a real theme on this series about sustainable practices and regenerative practices. What other sort of stuff are you guys implementing on your patch around that?
Oh, look, since 2016, we've pretty much eliminated cultivation out of our vines, planted, mixes of, multiple species, mixes of annual swards, rather than we're not really looking at perennial swards because we do a lot of dry growing.
Yeah.
But under vine mulching, looking at, that there's been a huge part of what we do. I think we're up to about 12,000 cubic metres under vine, and you can save 40% water and, stop having to spray as much. And so there's lots of practices, using sheep in the vineyard, looking at ways of, dealing with issues we've got. But again, looking at that soil health is the hugest thing. I mean, we've taken organic matter contents from sort of 1.4 to nearly 3%. Instead of losing all our leaves, we've got leaves. So there's a lot of practices around. The pruning's a really important part, but there's all these other things that we do in our vineyards that make a difference.
It's every single component bounces off another. It's don't think that you can do one thing different you're going to change the world. Like it's really look at your growing season, look at it from soil up to the top of your canopy, and
it's
understand.
a holistic look at the whole vineyard. You know, again, we're very. I think one of the hard things with our industry is there's not a lot of direction on what you're actually trying to achieve. Whereas working for a company like where we're doing, these are the wines that we make. They come from these vineyards. That allows us to. We've got a clear focus of what we're trying to do, and I think that's probably one of the hardest things when you're a grape grower, where you're selling to multiple companies, for instance. There's not that direction. And I don't think there's the experience in the winery side of things with people in viticulture that actually prune vines, you know, or know about actually running a vineyard, which I think is which is a problem for us in the industry.
And just expand on that. What is it like working for a world-renowned business like Torbreck, and the advantages of that, and what's special to you about being part of that? You've been there since 2015. It's over a decade now.
Oh, I mean, it's as Tom said, I really love my job. I like going to work. It's pleasing when you're doing well. But again, like I said, it makes it a bit easier because we've actually we know it's pretty clear what we're actually up to. But Tom might have some more comments on that.
Yeah, but I guess, are there enough people like you two coming through? I mean, are we valuing viticulture at this sort of level enough?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there's a push. I mean, I think Nigel touched on that, working with high school students and stuff. You know, the Barossa now has a regional work experience program, like that is a week long, kind of immerse yourselves in the industry and see what it has to give you. And I think that's a fantastic opportunity.
And what do kids say about seeing the way you guys go about it?
I mean, they
That's
love
not the way
it.
Grandpa does it.
There's always going to be stuff like that. I think my grandfather would probably be turning his grave with some of the decisions that I've made over my time. But I think and that's something that I say to him. Look, I'm not gonna detract from anything that you may have been told by your family or whatever. Like everyone, has a right to do what they want to do. But this is how I do it. And I challenged my grandfather at times back in the day, and there are times that I agreed and times that I disagreed. You don't need to change the world, but, at the same time, make your stand. And I guess with regard to working at Torbreck and working for a company like this, I mean, it's, the opportunity that presents itself working for a company like this and, things that you can do around the world, or, access to, technology, equipment, stuff like that. I mean, people say, like with young children right now, well, the next generation coming through, like farming's farming. And it's like, well, no, it's not. Like we've got access to a whole heap of tech, like some great stuff, whether it be, through machinery or, so another part of what I enjoy is the irrigation side of things, improving efficiency through irrigation. How do we decrease our water usage? But, like how do we make that more sustainable in a reasonable manner?
But I do think that viticulture has been ignored more and more. I think, as a comment, I think this is probably the industry is run more by accountants than by production side. The winemakers, there's a less focus on winemaking and viticulture, and I think that's a negative. You see a lot of ag tech. We've been very lucky. Ian always says that the vineyard's got all the technology, the winery hasn't. We do it, but it's all great to have that, but it's got to add value. And
very much so.
I think the money we've spent on pruning has added value. And balance and looking at sustainable practices. We're using less diesel. Pruning is actually we've actually decreased the cost of pruning, but got a better job. So those sort of things. So there's you can spend a lot of money on ag tech, but it's got to add value, and I haven't seen a lot of it. Probably the biggest bit of ag tech I've used, I started working with soil moisture monitoring in 1996, and I'm still using that technology today, and it's continuously logging. So we're not guessing. And I think that's part of the industry where the industry doesn't specify anything. There's no, you can measure things. There's a pretty clear way that we manage our vineyards, but it's very similar to a lot of other people that are making great wine. So again, I think we've probably lost a bit of focus on actually what matters.
Yeah.
What would you like to see change in the approach to viticulture? How long do we have?
Look, I mean, I think a big thing for me is communication within industry. I think that there's a lot to gain from particularly viticulture and winemaking. speaking to one another. When you look at companies that have communication between viticulture and winemaking, I think the results generally speak for themselves. You've always got, fantastic quality wines, and when there's a disjoint, there becomes problems. People get upset that one party's not speaking to the other. But I think that, something that I'd love to see change is that. And separately to that, I guess, further to, going back to my pruning conversation, I was fortunate enough to, be granted an opportunity through the Great Wine Capitals program that sent me off to Italy last year. And, one of the big conversations that we had there was, those guys saying to me, like, we've got Esca in our vineyards and we can deal with it. So how come you guys are having so many problems with Utipa? So for me, if there was something that I'd love to see change, it's particularly through what I'm trying to do now is, let's create healthier vineyards. Let's look at how we can actually do things a bit differently to, help secure our own futures.
Rather than accept that it is what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And go back to do the practices that we've done forever that we know are leading to, the disease and all that sort of stuff, and put out of balance vineyards. I mean, for me, we make wine. We're wine growers. We're not grape growers.
And it's funny, like, picking up on something you said earlier when you saw Tom's CV and like the fact that, this winemaker there who's, but we talk about studying viticulture or we talk about studying winemaking. Should the two things be brought together and combined?
Look, they are combined at the moment. My son is actually studying winemaking viticulture at Adelaide Uni, but I don't think there's enough focus on the actual growing. I mean, it's hard in a university situation, I think, where they're an academic institution. I think the beauty of Roseworthy College back in the day was that they had a winery and they had a vineyard, and there was no viticulture in those days, but they actually got hands-on experience. And I think the more hands-on we get, I think that's probably, we're in a fortunate situation at Torbreck. We've got some young guys, Tom, obviously he started just after I started, but we also now have two young trainees, a girl and a boy, local kids that worked at Torbreck and loved the place, and we're training them up. Yep. I think I was very fortunate working with companies like Yalumba. Yalumba are amazing at training people. And I was so fortunate to be able to go through a lot of their training programs. And that sort of inspires me. I think that legacy is just, something that we should be keeping on. I think we've always been innovative. And I look at our wines and I look at them against the best in the world and I go, wow, we're right up there. That's what drives me. It's like, wow, we're good enough. I just think more people need to actually believe it.
Absolutely.
And these old vines, I mean, again, there's old vines that are producing high yielding, low quality. To me, that's just, why? What are you doing? We can do, they can be so good.
More on the well-being side of things. Obviously, it's a tough time in the industry for lots of people at the moment. Do you see people feeling the pinch, feel it yourself at times, and how do you support each other?
Oh yeah, there's definitely, certainly the reality is starting to bite, particularly with obviously the tariffs and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's a group of growers that we're very lucky. We sort of meet lots of different people, but with a few growers, and there's a group of us now trying to get together and actually share our experiences. We do vineyard walks, and we've been talking about doing very soon to catch up and look at this pruning techniques, because it is a bit challenging for people, if you've been doing it for 5 or 6 generations and that's always how you've done it. But, again, I think the opportunity to go and we'll drop in and have a, snitter at the pub afterwards, I think that's...
Because it can be a bit isolating. You're out in your own vineyard and in your own head.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah. Oh, I got a pretty solid group of mates in the Barossa. Like, I guess we're all a similar age, all at similar spots in our careers. And, I think the last few years have really shown the guys that are growing for different price points, the ones that have probably, felt it more than others. I think, the big thing for us throughout that time is that we don't hide things from each other. If there's, if one of the guys is having problems selling fruit, this is, I guess, from a grape growing standpoint, I'm talking at the moment, we talk about it and the guys will try to rally and they'll use their connections to kind of go, okay, well, can this company spare a bit, or, can we help in any way? So I think, the big thing, well-being that well-being wise that I've learnt is that, when we don't talk to each other, we go silent and things can get pretty bad at times. But, as soon as we start talking, like, there's generally some kind of way to get some kind of solution.
Yeah. And there is no shame in talking either. And
none at all.
When the business is tough at the moment, it's not because you're doing a particularly shit job or there's something wrong with the way you're going.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the business
and it
at
happens.
the moment.
Sometimes you can't help it.
I think that's probably one of my concerns with the industry. I mean, I remember when I started in the industry, this ASBO is a great organisation, and I've been involved with that at different levels. But since COVID, it's gone towards more, podcasts and, Zoom meetings. And, I used to love going to Mildura and in the front bar of the Grand Hotel, I learnt more than the technical seminar the next day, which we were all hung over at. But, it was a great chance. And I think, as a general comment, sitting down and bring a bottle of wine, when there's a group of us trying to get together in the Barossa, a lot of growers that are probably right at the premium end of the market, and they a lot of times I think there's always a bit of a diversion in our industry. It's either going generic or you're going regional, and it's not you're not always making the most money by growing the best grapes. So there's a few of them that feel a bit lonely and isolated, and again we just say bring a bottle of wine. We'll just go and have a look at each other's vineyards and just share some time. But as an industry, I think we need to get back to having an event where we sit down, we go somewhere and we catch up and bring a bottle of wine. Bring the fun. I think that this society has become more conservative. Back in the day, the characters, there was a heck of a lot more characters.
We've all ended up in this business because, that.
That's right. I remember, guys like Peter Barry and, those guys, I mean, they're crazy fellas, but they were so good. They're such good storytellers. That's something that, again, I think, we're in a fortunate situation that, I think we still have a bit of fun with what we do. And, and our customers love it, that we sit down and have a barbie and, drink some wine around the barbecue.
Yeah.
You've been around a long time, Nigel. You think people have gotten more open?
Look at him.
You think people have gotten more open around, talking about what goes into around the edges of what they do and the realities of how tough that can be?
I think so. I mean, there's less of us in the industry, so I guess that's one of the big things is there's not as many people to talk to. Certainly viticulture-wise, there's definitely nowhere near as many viddies on the ground as what there used to be. So, again, I think it's more important that we actually get out and talk and catch up.
And Beck Wetherall, who we've had on this series, she's recently pioneered the first wellbeing workshops in the Barossa, bringing growers together specifically for it was under the guise of a bit of an industry update, but then it was also a wellbeing workshop. Do you think there's something to be gained from more of a concerted effort on maintaining physical and mental well-being? And it's can be a bit of a tough sell at times, but do you think that's something that's important to do? I mean, you mentioned the importance of having to bring a bottle of wine and have those chats as well. Do you think focusing on it can only be a good thing, or are people really wary of spending their time on that sort of stuff?
I guess it depends on the conversation base. I mean, for us, like, I know that, when I'm talking with my mates and stuff like that, the conversations we try to make it on, we'll obviously talk about like the tough bits and pieces of what's going on, but we really want to try and focus on, bringing each other up as opposed to the doom and gloom of what's going on. So I think, yes, it's great to talk about it and to express your feelings, but, try and bring, there's definitely positivity out there. Like, there's great things happening. You've just got to, unfortunately, work a bit harder, I think, than we have in the past to get there. But 100% talk about it and make that, that platform, give people that voice to be able to share their feelings and, try and help them through it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're in a fortunate situation that we have got a small group where we can always talk, but I think there's a lot of people out there that don't get that opportunity. And I don't think that, as a general comment, the wineries do enough or do as much these days in terms of, when I was doing grower liaison, I did it for 20 years, you'd try and visit on every at least twice a year outside of vintage. And I just don't think that's as much of a thing these days. So it is hard for, I think, the more there's people that don't get that opportunity. So if there is an opportunity, it's a good thing for everyone. There's another forum for that.
Yeah.
In the Barossa, we've got the Barossa Australia, and they do a really good job of, trying to connect people in the industry when there's not other avenues for that.
What do you guys make sure you do to look after yourselves?
Stay fit as much as possible. I like eating and drinking, so you've got to.
It's a problem with the industry.
What do you do to keep fit?
I do a bit of CrossFit and stuff like that. Play a bit of touch football. We've got at Torbreck we've got a touch football team, and that's great thing. We've got some young kids now which can actually run. So try and do that. Be involved in that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, mine was always music as well. Great for me. Feeling a bit down, go out and belt something out on a saxophone or do whatever. That was always a good release for me.
I've got a vegetable garden, which I always found was quite stressful leaving. Go and dig the ground up a bit.
Yeah, we've heard that a few times.
Yeah, I think that's important. But eat healthily as well. I mean, I think food and wine that's why I like the industry. I like food. So I grew up on a farm and we grew vegetable gardens, and we always eat something out of the vegetable garden. So again, I think it's that's a big part of what we do.
What's good in the garden at the moment?
Well, I picked some broccoli and some cauliflower last night, and some carrots out of the garden. So it was good. Having eaten English food for the last few weeks, it's I tell you what, it's nice to get some fresh vegetables and stuff into it. So yeah.
Looking towards the future of the region, what are you hoping happens, and perhaps what are you wary of, or maybe a bit worried about going forward?
Look, I think there's lots of positives. I mean, I spent a couple of weeks in England, and I think good Barossa wine from our regional point of view I think regional wine is definitely an opportunity. We need to start talking more about the positives in our industry. I think we do a really good job.
100%.
I mean, there's so many diverse styles out there. I mean, I think one of my concerns would be that I think, a full-bodied wine has probably as the conversation around the traps is probably more about medium-bodied and different styles. That's fine. That's great. But let's not lose track of where we are and what we do. Again, at Torbreck, our style is not like everyone else. That's a point of difference. So focus on your point of difference. But, I love in what we do. We grow our grapes to represent who we are.
Yeah.
And no one can copy that. And that's a positive. That's great.
No, it's always been a key part of the Torbreck DNA is, those wines are, instantly recognisable. Yep. They are Torbreck, spot on.
Yeah, just do it better.
Yeah.
Keep doing it better, because we're such innovative farmers. I think our viticulture and winemaking are really world class, and I think we just got to keep focusing on that and keep delivering.
And is there really an inability for people to pat themselves on the back and, like you said, focus on the positive, because some of the negatives are more obvious, and that's how we're wired, is to look out for danger? Is there a bit of an inability for people to think about the positive side?
Oh yeah,
I think there can be. Yeah, for sure.
Being farmers, I mean, like when you're sitting in a tractor all day, you end up just going over things, and I think the more we can, just try and keep focusing on those positive things.
And I think we've touched on that in a couple of other episodes. I think in a community like the Barossa too, wine industry is tough, and we're almost sick of hearing it. But when it's such a major part of the community, it's sort of when everyone down the street is talking about things being tough, it does seem to sort of snowball, and you've got to really work hard at going, well, there are great, there is reason for optimism. There are opportunities here, and this, what makes this place special is all still here.
Yeah.
Trading conditions are tough at the moment, but the fundamentals are all still.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We're playing with some newer varieties. I've watched a few of the podcasts and talk about, and there's lots of people sort of focusing on these newer varieties. And, we've working with Grenache Blanc and Clairette and Counoise and Carignan. I think, we can never sort of stop innovating as well. So we do need to keep looking at that. And again, suits our regional style. And so there's some really exciting wines coming out, newer wines that are going to be coming out. So again, keep focusing on those positives and, get through this period. I think, it's nice that China's back on board, and they love our wines. So again, hopefully that's going to help our region a bit. You know, it's going to give us a bit of a leg up. So keep positive.
Tom, you're still a young man, got all your hair and
I've been around a really long time. You're ancient and crusty.
Yeah, no, definitely young. That's a good comment.
where are you looking at going with your long career? Are you going to stay in the Barossa throughout? Have you got plans of taking it elsewhere?
Oh, look, I think so. I think my life is pretty well cemented in the Barossa Valley. You know, I've been fortunate enough to travel. I've done a vintage in southern France. That was amazing. You know, I've gotten out to Italy. One of my sisters, she's now, you know, her partner's pretty heavily involved in viticulture in Martinborough, New Zealand. So, you know, I think I can stay in the Barossa Valley and still experience the world in what I do. And, you know, I think that's another super special part of this industry is, you know, I'm not confined to a desk or anything like that. I can literally get out and see the world doing what I'm doing. So, you know, I've got a beautiful property. You know, I love what I do. You know.
And what sort of mark would you like to leave?
Oh, my mark is simply that I hope that, you know, people look at, you know, what I've done one day and understand that regardless of what I've done, you know, I've come in and I've, you know, made an effort to make it better, regardless of, you know, how good or bad something might have been in the first place. I don't want to limit myself to thinking that, you know, something's good enough. I want to make things better. You know, if I've got a career at Torbreck, you know, awesome. Yeah, we'll see how it goes, I guess.
I'm hoping to hold him for a fair while.
Seems like the bloke that Torbreck would want to keep around.
Well, I think there's definitely a strategy. And when I first met Tom was about, you know, I was looking for people who were interested in staying around. I think our industry is a long-term game.
Yeah.
Again, I think that succession planning is certainly some of the thinking behind, you know, working with guys like Tom, and we've got some young kids that we're hoping we're going to take on the industry. We're training them how to, you know, drive tractors and prune vines, but they've got they're smart kids. You know, we'd love them to go and do a bit more study and learn. They could be the next Tom. You know, that's certainly something that we have thought a lot about in terms of trying to train that next generation, because what is the legacy if you learn all this stuff and then don't pass it on?
Yeah.
So, you know, again, I'm really happy because Tom's a smart guy and picking up on what I've learnt over the years. And again, I think that's probably where we want to keep fostering that with the next generation.
Are you at a stage of starting to plan out succession?
Yes and no. I mean, I think I've still got a few more years left.
Yeah, despite what Callum keeps telling you,
not that old.
you're not going to kill
but again,
it
certainly, you know, again, I'm thinking about, you know, how Tom takes on sort of roles that I'm, you know, again, there's opportunity. I actually think there's opportunity for, you know, someone said to me the other day, you're a marketer. And I am. Yeah. I am a marketer because it's in my best interest to market the products that we make.
Yeah.
Well, you can talk if you haven't already. Definitely.
Yeah, but again, that's you know, the more people from the vineyard side that talk adds just another level of, you know, why we're so good at what we do. And I think there's, you know, growers, it's a great opportunity for growers to be able to, you know, we love taking customers to our growers' vineyards because, you know, we don't produce all the fruit for Torbreck. It's 50-50. And, you know, it's so nice to be able to visit people that live on the land. And that's I think more and more people are disengaged from agriculture. So again, more agricultural people that actually get out and talk.
Well, no one knows the story better than them.
No, that's right. Exactly. And again, sustainability, you know, the hard thing for sustainability for me is that I think the growers that I've worked with over the years, and I've learnt more working with grape growers than I have working with anyone.
Yeah.
They're already sustainable. They you know, you're not farming to destroy your land.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's a story that's well worth telling.
Particularly a lot of those generational growers, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
The real respect and love for that, you know, vineyard that their grandfather pruned and their great grandfather, and you know that lineage is such a key part of the Barossa story.
And again, I think we've got a great opportunity where we're at with our careers to lead by example. You know, and again, I think the linkage between what we do in the vineyard and the wine that we make is really clear, and it's a very strong message. And that's what the Barossa and a lot of the wine regions, I think, have got. You know, they've got this generational farming that is unique. You know, if you're in France, you grow the grapes, you make the wine, and then you sell the wine. Yeah, that, you know, that's a different setup altogether.
Sounds like there's a lot of cause for optimism, and the future's in some good hands.
Yeah, Hope so.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
And if not, it's your fault.
Yeah, we know that. Ian's told that before. Yeah, all care, no responsibility.
Thanks, fellas.
No worries.
Cheers,
Thank you,
guys.
boys. Thanks for listening. Head to the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website for links and further resources. This is part of a bigger conversation, so feel free to share this podcast with your mates and look after yourselves. Cheers.